We are going to be plowing our way through the book of Job again this evening, and I welcome you all. I presume the screen share is working. Yes, thank you. So I am going to just refresh your memories about where we are and what's going on. But I'm going to do this, very quickly. That basically the book of Job is, in a sense, appears to be in two distinct genres. One is called the fable, which is a fairly simplistic, both literarily and story-wise, story of, Job, God arguing with Satan, and they make a bet, and the bet is basically, will Job remain loyal and faithful if God allows Satan to inflict, terrible things on his family and illness upon him, and Job remains loyal. And then in round two, Job is then afflicted with a terrible illness himself and still remains loyal. And then at the very end, there's kind of a happily ever after section where Job's fortunes are restored, and he gets twice as much stuff and new kids and a new mountain bike. That's actually in one of the Aramaic translations, not necessarily in what you've seen. So that's the fable. And then we move on in our discussion to the poem, which is, as I mentioned last week, 90% of the book, 39 chapters. We are definitely not going to read it all. The Hebrew is quite poetic and complex. And one of the main translations into Greek leaves out several dozen verses because of translation issues. And as you read, in Sefaria and other places, you'll see lots of references to meaning of Hebrew in so many that I've stopped. I started taking them out. And the poem of Job, the poem raises important issues, but doesn't necessarily answer them. So this is just something to keep in mind as we get into this discussion. Are people rewarded for good deeds? Does God care what kind of person I am? Is it okay to be angry with God, to doubt God's existence, and still be a religious person? And I would add, to be a good Jew. The poem of Job completely leaves the fable behind. So a very important thing to realize and to keep in mind is there is no mention in this 39 chapters of the poem of Job to the bet with Satan. The poem doesn't seem to be aware of the fable and the story with Satan. And Job is meek and patient. We often talk about the patience of Job, but only for 2 chapters. And as you'll see in the chapter 3 as we start, Job is anything but meek or patient. So let me just continue. And as I mentioned, the structure, and we are going to skip a lot in this book. There is basically, Job is visited by 3 friends. And I think we made reference in the material we read, I think at the end of chapter 2, the friends sit with him quietly for 7 days. And there is a Jewish tradition called sitting Shiva or observing Shiva. The word Shiva means 7, and it's a time of intense mourning. And basically, Job's friends try to explain to Job why he is suffering. And there's 3 different cycles, and then there's another friend that shows up, Elihu. First cycle, responding. Second cycle, temperatures getting a little shorter. Third cycle, more confusion and interruption. Throughout, Job challenges God's fairness and kindness, and the 3 friends defend God. Bryce.
Well, one question that occurs to me that was probably doesn't occur to other people, or not everyone, I should say. I can't speak for anyone else. But what is the reason that we have allegiance to a God in the first place? Okay, and that, and one thing that is actually part of our Torah, which we have in a sense suppressed to a degree, but not completely, is the concept that there are multiple gods. Then this one is our God.
Yeah. So what I would say is,
but I'm not. There's one more point that was
yes.
okay. And that is why, okay, why would you swear allegiance to a God in the first place if you had a choice? It's to avoid bad things happening and to get good stuff. So if someone just gets masses of horror, then why would you continue to have allegiance to a God that delivered that much horror to you? And that occurs to me, but probably not everybody.
Yeah. So what I would say is, it's an important question, and I would say Job, in a sense, is the only book that deals with this question. And maybe I'm happy to be corrected on this, but Job is one of the few books in the Bible, maybe the only book that really addresses theology. I don't know what happened to Bryce. Why don't I see Bryce? Whoops. Okay. Oh yeah. Okay, he's blocked out. Job is the only book that seems to address theology.
I'm not logged out.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. No, it is the only book that seems to address these kinds of questions. And I think about that a lot, and particularly because you raise this question often in discussion, and
my struggle with God.
right. And so what I would say is, it reminds me, and I can't remember, I think it was Churchill who said, democracy is a terrible form of government, only all the other ones are worse.
Yeah.
And that is, there's lots of problems with religion, but we've seen what happens when the idea of God is rejected by society, and it seems to get much worse. And I don't want to engage in a debate on it, but I'll just say
Sure.
communism, Nazism, and so on. So, but importantly, in the Bible, this issue isn't really addressed. Every people has its God. And so this is the chronology of the Israelite people's relationship with the Israelite God. But back in those times, it would never be questioned that a people would not have a God. So, but it's an important question. Okay, so I talked about this last time, and I think it's important, at least for me, to keep track of the logic. So I'll look at this first set. The three statements: God is all powerful. God is completely, I would add, just and good. And evil and tragedy exists, or another way of saying this is bad things happen to good people. According to logic, all three of these can't be true. They can all be false, or there can be no God, in which case we have nothing to question. There's nothing to talk about. Kushner, in his books, basically argues that God is not all powerful, and that's where he comes out. It's important, I think, to recognize where Job is coming from. So, and we'll see it over and over again in this discussion. Job absolutely believes that God is all powerful, but Job denies that God is good and just. And Job knows that bad things are happening to him, namely that evil or tragedy exists. So that's the logic. As we'll see, Job's friends insist on number 3 being false. Basically, Job's friends are saying, we believe in Torah, we believe in the power and goodness of God. If you're suffering, if bad things are happening to you, it must be because you've done something wrong. Job insists on number 2, as I mentioned, and Kushner will insist on number 1 being false. And I mentioned last week, Job's friends come to comfort him, but Job is not looking for vindication, but to make sense of what's happening to him. And it's worth noting, with all of our critique of Job's friends, that at least they in this argument, they listen to each other and respond to each other, not something we always see in modern arguments. Okay, so we're getting more people coming in. So as I mentioned in a note here, and this is just opening Safaria's discussion, there are many difficulties in the poetry of Job, making interpretations of words, verses, and even chapters uncertain. The rubric meaning of Hebrew uncertain in this book indicates only some of the extreme instances. So with that introduction, would someone like to begin to read from the text?
I could do it.
Okay, thanks, Bryce.
Afterward, Job began to speak and cursed the day of his birth. Job spoke up and said, "Perish the day on which I was born, and the night it was announced. A male has been conceived.
So notice that Job's patience is gone, as I mentioned. This is chapter 3, verse 1 of a 42 chapter book. So Job is no longer patient. And the Talmud, I think, reacting to this, say that comforters are not permitted to say a word until the mourner opens the conversation. And you may know that there is a tradition in Shiva. I would say not so many people are aware of it, and it's actually very hard to discipline yourself to observe it. When you're visiting someone in mourning, the tradition is just to sit with them and not say a word. There's a traditional Hebrew statement, but by and large, you don't say anything, and you let the mourner begin the conversation. And as I think I mentioned last time, the mourner may want to talk about, memories and funny things, or they just may want to express their grief. They may just want to cry. Or they may want to talk about football. It's you're there for the mourner. And Job wishes, and is going to, say this very eloquently, that he had never been born, rather than to undergo what he is experiencing. Okay, continuing his lament.
May that day be darkness. May God above have no concern for it. May light not shine on it. May darkness and deep gloom reclaim it. May a pall lie over it. May what blackens the day terrify it. May obscurity carry off that night. May it not be counted among the days of the year. May it not appear in any of its months.
Job is talking about the day of his birth. So, I mean, it's very poetic, very eloquent.
May that night be desolate. May no sound of joy be heard in it. May those who cast spells upon the day damn it. Those prepared to disable Leviathan, may its twilight stars remain dark. May it hope for light and have none. May it not see the glimmering of the dawn, because it did not block my mother's womb and hide trouble from my eyes.
So there are a couple of really obscure references. So there's a reference to Leviathan, which is a primordial beast in the creation story. And as I read some of the commentary, I didn't bother to type in a little box. They were talking about this idea, or the primitive idea, of mythical creatures like swallowing the sun during an eclipse and so on. And so this may be a reference to those ideas. There's a completely, the Hebrew word for funeral, I'll ask Debbie always to check me, is levaya. So there was a reference to mourning, and some commentators interpret this as a reference to mourning and funerals. And the final nun in that word can be it's sort of an Aramaicized plural form. But basically, he wants that night to last forever without morning stars. And the reference to the umbilicus that nurtured Job in utero, in terms of blocking the womb. Jerry.
It doesn't sound like Job is patient at all here in finding out what this is all about. And yet we very often ask that we have the patience of Job.
Yes. So I mentioned this earlier. The patience of Job is a myth. It's because people don't get past chapter 2. Job is very patient, and there's some beautiful words in chapter 2. Someone dies. At every funeral we say, Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai mevarach. God has given, God has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Job says to his wife, should we not accept evil as well as good from God? It all sounds very tranquil and meditative and accepting, and it lasts for 2 chapters. And so we're not going to see that Job again.
Okay. So it did.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
This
Thanks.
is Job, who is not patient at all. Okay.
And a question about that Leviathan reference.
Yeah.
What your comment made it sound like Levia had something to do with a funeral.
Yes.
So is
Levaya.
Leviathan a pun on it?
Well, so the question is, you have a text
Interesting.
where it's obscure and the text doesn't have vowels. So scholars or rabbis trying to make sense of this reference can go in very different directions. In English, it's unambiguously Leviathan. So, you know, this text was copied, and it's an ancient text, over 2,000 years old. So people are trying to make sense of it, and that's one of the ways that they make sense of it.
No, that's
Okay.
a really, that's a great concept. And if the duality is like that, that adds such depth of meaning to it, it's really, really good.
Yeah, I can, you know, I have the commentary, and even the commentary is unclear, at least to me.
Yeah.
3, 8.
It's 3-8.
Yeah. Yeah, Rashi and Ibn Ezra refer to a passage in the Palestinian Talmud which relates to the wailing of women at funerals. A woman should not stir up her funeral band, levayatha, to wail during the intermediate days of the festivals. They accordingly regard the final nun as the suffix there and render their mourning rather than a reference to this primordial beast. So, you know, sometimes without vowels, there can be very different interpretations. There's no question of the sense of what Job is expressing here.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm not dwelling on it.
It's just jarring, but at least
Yes.
it's good to know that if the women were wailing, now that's how we know Leviathan got his name.
Yeah, but yeah. So the question is whether the nun at the end of Leviathan is part of a name or refers to a possessive suffix, their wailing. Okay, let's continue.
Why did I not die at birth, expire as I came forth from the womb? Why were there knees to receive me, or breast for me to suck? For now would I be lying in repose, asleep and at rest, with the world's kings and counselors who rebuild ruins for themselves, or with nobles who possess gold and who fill their houses with silver.
So Job prefers the afterlife to his present suffering. He would rather be dead, in case you haven't gotten that message yet.
Or why was I not like a buried stillbirth, like babies who never saw the light? There the wicked cease from troubling. There rest those whose strength is spent. Prisoners are wholly at ease. They do not hear the taskmaster's voice. Small and great alike are there, and the slave is free from his master.
He's still
So,
grieving. He's grieving.
Sorry?
I feel like this is Job finally grieving.
Job is suffering. I mean, he presumably is grieving over the loss of his children, but he's also suffering some horrible disease. And in Sheol, everyone, evil, good, great, small, are at profound rest. So he wants to be dead.
He'd rather be dead, yeah.
Yep.
Well, when you're in pain, you want release, and that's the only release. I know. Yeah.
Yes, and particularly, you know, if there aren't other forms of relief, thankfully we have ways of relief, but not everyone has relief. So this is certainly Job. Let's continue.
Why does he give light to the sufferer and life to the bitter in spirit, to those who wait for death, but it does not come, who search for it more than for treasure, who rejoice to exultation and are glad to reach the grave, to the man who has lost his way, whom God has hedged about? My groaning serves as my bread, my roaring pours forth as water. For what I feared has overtaken me, what I dreaded has come upon me. I had no repose, no quiet, no rest, and trouble came.
Okay, so I'm going to ask someone else to read, because now we're going to have the first of Job's friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, replying. So would someone else like to read, just to keep the, yeah, go ahead, Julie.
Oh, okay.
I might-
Then Eliphaz the Temanite said in reply, if one ventures a word with you, will it be too much? But who can hold back his words? See, you have encouraged many. You have strengthened failing hands. Your words have kept him who stumbled from falling. You have braced knees that gave way.
So basically, Eliphaz is now going to respond, and basically he's saying, you've helped a lot of people in similar situations. You have comforted sufferers. How would you advise someone in your situation?
But now that it overtakes you, it is too much. It reaches you, and you are unnerved. Is not your piety, your confidence, your integrity, your hope? Think now, what innocent man ever perished? Where have the upright been destroyed? As I have seen, those who plow evil and sow mischief reap them.
Okay, so we're getting to the theology. Basically, have faith in God. I can't remember if I have another little comment here. Yeah. So verse 7, he says, bad things don't happen to good people. What innocent man ever suffered? When have the upright been destroyed? Those who plow evil and sow mischief reap them. So this is now we're getting to the heart of the theology. Citing verse 7, the Talmud teaches, if one is visited by suffering, afflicted with disease, or has buried his children, one must not speak to him as his companions spoke to Job. I think I talked about this last week. When you're visiting someone who is suffering, both in mourning or just suffering, it is not the time to talk about theology. Alan.
This is a little troubling because it's implied by verse 7 that there are good people and who have no bad things ever happen to them. If I'm interpreting that, which is which doesn't, so the author, is the author suggesting there are actually people who never have bad things happen to them? Because
yeah, the author basically is arguing Deuteronomy. He's saying, if you obey God's laws, bad things won't happen to you.
Well,
And-
Eliphaz is saying that whether the author.
Eliphaz, yeah, not Job. Yes,
Yeah.
Eliphaz.
I guess from a Jewish practice, personal perspective, I'm having trouble with that statement because people have different degrees of not liking what happened to them, and things are really bad. But who gets through without? So nobody.
Yes. But
All right, I'm missing.
you're arguing.
Yeah, right.
You're arguing with Eliphaz and you're arguing with Deuteronomy, right? I mean, Deuteronomy is very simplistic. If you follow God's laws, good things will happen to you. And if you don't follow God's laws, bad things will happen to you. That sounds very succinct and understandable. The only problem with it is it's clearly not true.
But I guess I read the appendix. The appendix said when those bad things happen, you actually can you take some influence in what happens next.
Yes, but
That's not here.
I don't know what you mean by the appendix. but-
Well, I'm extending. In other words, when we learn about tshuva, when we learn about various things that are in our tradition, it's helping to grasp with and how to deal with bad things that happen.
Yes, and all I can say is Job is a book that's struggling with that
Okay.
question.
Okay,
Brad,
I have the appendix. If Job comes by, let me give him the appendix. So
I don't know what you mean by the appendix. Are you
Oh,
talking
it's the
theology after this?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
not. It's more the what. Since I don't believe that there is nobody who's never good, never bad, or never good, whatever, then this doesn't only upsets me if somebody actually thinks there are people who never are
Yeah,
bad.
but in the narrative, Eliphaz is just clarifying what's going on, right?
Okay, yeah.
It's contrast, like a die, it's contrast, right?
Okay, okay. I'll go away.
Rabbi,
Yes, Erwin and then Bryce. Yeah.
yeah, when I know personally when some bad things happen to good people who are very close to you, you suffer just as much.
Yes,
Yes, I would say that's true.
yes.
I would say there's a lot of truth in that. There's a saying which has a lot of meaning to me, and that is it's hard to be happier than your least happy child.
Yeah.
Okay, Bryce.
Yeah, a couple things. One is it's an interesting set of statements to say if you're good and you do good things will happen to you. If you do bad things will happen to you. That's very clear. But it's human nature to then extend it with a corollary saying if bad things happen to you, you must have done bad things.
Right, and that's
And that
Eliphaz's
is the
argument.
problem. And
Yes.
the second thing is, and this is related, my mother, before I was ever conceived, told me about, and she was Seventh-day Adventist, and she was in a terrible car accident. She was a passenger. She ended up with both legs broken, one in 17 places, both mandibles broken, and her arms broken. Oh, I'm sorry, her clavicles broken, both clavicles broken.
Oh,
And she's lying in the hospital bed, and the minister comes and visits and says, daughter, it's important for you to try to understand and try to come to understand what it is that you did to bring this evil upon you.
oh, oh,
Yes. So yeah,
And that's
so
when
that's
she said in her mind,
oh.
up and said, if you leave me alone, I'll leave you alone.
so that's sort of the book of Job. And I think I told the story when my mother collapsed, and she was a heavy smoker, emphysema, and just collapsed. And she was basically, I think she was brain dead for a year and a half, on a ventilator. And for about 6 months was in an ICU. And we're waiting in the waiting room, and when you're there with someone for a long time, you get to know people. And Bill Schaus, I'm going to ask you to comment on this, so get ready. My brothers and I and my father, we're just angry with God at what happened to my mother. And another young woman was also on a ventilator, also collapsed, and she was actually, no, maybe it was a young man, and his wife was pregnant with their child. And his sister said she was angry with God, but she was visited by a priest, and the priest told her that it is not okay to be angry with God. So I don't even know if that's, I'm going to ask you, Bill, whether, does that sound like standard Catholic teaching to you, but so I'm just curious whether, but I always am grateful for the fact that Judaism allows you to struggle with God and be angry with God, and the word Israel means to wrestle with God. But
And how does a 2-year-old produce any evil and get
so
cancer?
anyway, that's no, I don't know what you're talking about, but in this case they were adults. Yeah, go ahead, Bill, if you want to comment.
I mean, it is not sound Catholic theology to say that one can never be angry with God. I think we inherit from our Jewish, what we call our matriarchs and patriarchs, ancestors in faith, cousins in faith. I think we inherit the ability to wrestle with God. But I think Christianity generally has more trouble with being honest with God. And that's kind of why I'm on this Zoom, because I want to learn more. I'm not just speaking from an observational point of view. I think Judaism has much more ability to do what Job is doing, is to get angry with God. I think Christianity has more trouble with that. So I think
Yeah,
what
and you teach this to Christian groups, right? To Catholic groups.
yeah, and it's hard for people to hear that it's okay to wrestle and to struggle and to get angry. It's a very it's a very good thing psychologically and spiritually. There's nothing wrong with it. And we go to the book of Job. I just think that on a grassroots level, on a pastoral level, and from a more pietistic point of view, people have a lot of trouble with that. They don't
Mhm.
think that they should get angry
Right,
with
right,
God.
right. Thank you. And I'll point out, I think most of you know this, but Dr. Scholz teaches at LMU, Loyola Marymount University, and I don't know if you're still doing it, but you for many years are training deacons in the Catholic Church. So happy to have you here.
Rabbi Lottker is a frequent guest in my classes.
I am happy to be so. Okay, Julie, why don't you continue with
All
this?
right.
Is again Job's friend Eliphaz continuing.
They perish by a blast from God, are gone at the breath of his nostrils. The lion may roar, the cub may howl, but the teeth of the king of beasts are broken. The lion perishes for lack of prey, and its whelps are scattered. Its
So-
whelps are
So
scattered.
he's describing people who have disobeyed God, the imagery.
A word came to me in stealth. My ear caught a whisper of it. In thought-filled visions of the night, when deep sleep falls on men, fear and trembling came upon me, causing all my bones to quake with fright. A wind passed by me, making the hair of my flesh bristle. It halted. Its appearance was strange to me. A form loomed before my eyes. I heard a murmur, a voice. Can mortals be acquitted by God? Can man be cleared by his maker? If he cannot trust his own servants and casts reproach on his angels, how much less those who dwell in houses of clay, whose origin is dust, who are crushed like the moth.
I think I have. Let me back up. So the argument here, and again, I see this in commentaries, is if God can't even be sure that angels and his own servants are beyond reproach, how much less are ordinary mortals going to be blameless? So again, this is the argument of Eliphaz, that God is punishing you for things you have done wrong.
Shattered between daybreak and evening, perishing forever unnoticed. Their cord is pulled up and they die, and not with wisdom.
Bryce.
Yeah, could you back up one? I have to say, I don't understand line 17.
Yeah,
Can
I have some trouble with it myself. I think what he's really saying is, if you've done bad things, you're going to be punished by God. God, I was
Yeah,
looking
but-
at the Hebrew, Yitzadak, you're not going to be made a tzedek, and you're not going to be made taher, to be pure. You are going to suffer for this. My sense of this is, the revelation that comes to Eliphaz is that man is imperfect and dare not vindicate himself before God. It is a presumption for him to imagine that he can be pure before his maker. And again, this is not later Jewish theology where we have redemption from sin and all these other things. This is basically.
Rabbi,
Hold on a second, Bryce. Go ahead. I don't know
Yeah,
if you.
yeah. So I was just going to say, just to finish up, if the idea is that there isn't any possibility of us ever being pure or clean, okay? If it's impossible, okay, then it's pointless.
Yeah, but this is Eliphaz. This is not God.
I understand that, but this
Okay.
Eliphaz, and I'm, but
First point.
Eliphaz is speaking with the words of the Torah.
Right, which God is going to reject. And that's the whole point for studying this book.
It's coming.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be patient. There's 42 chapters. You need the patience of Job in the first 2 chapters. But that is exactly, I mean, Bryce, it's exactly the point.
Well, that's
That-
not, I don't have a problem with
Well,
that statement, but I'm just trying to understand the argument from the speech. Can mortals be acquitted by God? Well, if God, even if God can't do it, can man be cleared by his maker? Well, then the answer would be, these are rhetorical questions that the answer must be no, otherwise.
Right.
Yes.
So Eliphaz is basically arguing Deuteronomy. If you look in the Torah,
yeah.
other than sacrifices at the temple, which hasn't taken place for 2,000 years, there is no way to get right with God in the Torah.
Well,
In Jewish
Rabbi-
tradition, we have redemption, and we have forgiveness of sin and everything else. It's not in the Torah. So the whole point of this book is to make the point that it's more complicated than the simplistic treatment in the Torah. Erwin.
Yes, but maybe it's not in a Torah, but it's in a Siddur, because when I wake up in the morning and I pray to God, I say that he cleanses my soul from the previous sins.
Right. So it's in the Siddur, it's in Midrash. This is the discussion in the Bible of this issue. But certainly, don't the devil may quote scripture, but let's not quote Eliphaz.
Exactly.
Okay, let's continue. I can't remember. Did you read this? I can't remember, Julie. I don't think so.
No.
Okay.
Shattered between daybreak and evening, perishing forever, unnoticed. Oh, yes, I did. Excuse me.
Okay.
Their cord is pulled up and they die, and not with wisdom.
Okay, yes. Okay, so he's going to continue into chapter 5.
For man is born to do mischief, just as sparks fly upward. But I would resort to God. I would lay my case before God. See how happy is the man whom God reproves. Do not reject the discipline of the Almighty. He injures, but he binds up. He wounds, but his hands heal.
There is a concept in Judaism which we even hear to this day called Yisurin Shel Ahava. I can't remember where we were studying this. Maybe it was a Talmud study, where basically we should be happy when God has punished us for our sins, because that means justice has taken place and now we can start anew. This is what Eliphaz is quoting. Okay, now Job is going to respond, chapter 6. So
Then-
let's have somebody else read.
Yes, thank you.
Joanne, Joanne, if you want to read, you have to unmute, since we haven't become lip readers.
Good idea. Thank you. Okay. Then Job said in reply, if my anguish were weighed, my full calamity laid on the scales, it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. That is why I spoke recklessly. For the arrows of the Almighty are in me. My spirit absorbs their poison. God's terrors are arrayed against me.
So, verse 4, God has unjustly done this to me. Job's agony is that God has become his adversary. Here I'm heavily relying on Harold Kushner's commentary.
Would that my request were granted, that God gave me what I wished for. Would that God consented to crush me, loosed his hand and cut me off. Then this would be my consolation. As I writhed in unsparing panic, thus I did not suppress my words against the Holy One.
So this is an important point, and it's a little hard in translation, and Hebrew's difficult. Job and Kushner and I, this is now me talking, believe that God prefers honesty rather than the flattery of Eliphaz that tries to assure that God is in charge and everything's okay. This is going to be a continuing thing we're going to be hearing from Job. And again, I certainly approach God this way in my own life, and you know, and I hear people in agony approaching God in the same way, that honest anguish and questioning before God is preferable than empty flattery. I mean, you know, there's, rather than just empty statements, God is good. God doesn't give us more than we can handle. God doesn't close the door without opening the window. I mean, you know, someone died and God needed another angel in heaven. And I remember once doing a funeral for a fairly young woman, I'd say in her 30s and 40s, that died of a horrible disease. And, you know, and I just railed against the idea that God wanted this. And this was at a funeral home that's not Jewish. I mean, they have a Jewish section. This was in Pierce Brothers, those of you know, in Westlake Village. And afterwards, the funeral director thanked me for saying what I said, because he said he hears over and over again, as you can imagine, there's a lot more non-Jewish funerals than Jewish funerals there. The idea that everything is really okay. We've had this horrible thing happen, but everything is really okay because this is all God's will. So this is something neither Job nor Kushner nor I can easily accept. Okay.
Did I say to you, I need your gift? Pay a bribe for me out of your wealth. Deliver me from the clutches of my enemy. Redeem me from violent men. Teach me, I shall be silent. Tell me where I am wrong. How trenchant honest words are, but what sort of reproof comes from you?
I don't know if I have a comment on this. Yeah, basically, Job is saying to his friends, who asked you for the theology lecture? You know, if show me where I'm wrong.
Do you devise words of reproof, but count a hopeless man's words as wind? You would even cast lots over an orphan, or barter away your friend. Now be so good as to face me. I will not lie to your face. Relent. Let there not be injustice. Relent. I am still in the right. Is injustice on my tongue? Can my palate not discern evil?
So Job refuses to admit that he has sinned and is being justly punished by God. I mean, we can argue no one is without sin and so on, but you know, ironically, if we think about the opening chapters, the narrator of the fable has told us that Job really was without sin. As difficult it is to imagine anyone, but Job is basically saying, you know, I'm speaking the truth.
Well, yeah, I mean, his friends aren't really that friendly here, right?
Yes, there's
I
I mean, people are always saying, with friends like this, who needs enemy?
Yeah.
And the only good thing you can say about them is at least they show up. But they're going to get a lot more hostile and argumentative as this book goes on.
I think
Bryce.
you can end it at they showed up. That's it.
Yes. Yep. Bryce.
Yeah, there was a TV show several years ago called The Good Place.
Yes.
And and one of the things they made a point of toward the end is that the web of society is such that you cannot help, no matter how hard you try, but commit sins left and right, little ones, and they just add up. And it is impossible to lead a blameless life, and that the universe was built in such a way as to conspire against anyone ever being good enough to make heaven.
Okay. I mean, I don't remember that point from The Good Place, but
Well, that was the point of the end of it. That was the
at the end. Yeah, I
whole...
thought I enjoyed the first couple of seasons of that.
Yeah, well, it was the last
bizarre.
season where you learned that
anyway.
stuff. Yes.
But so I would say I would certainly agree, you know, that what's that statement from that Second Testament? He who's without sin cast the first stone.
Yeah.
But the question is what's happening to Job just? That all of his children die, that he loses everything, that he gets afflicted with this horrible disease. So, admittedly, we would not think that Job is perfect, but the question is he experiencing justice? Alan.
The concept of the Messiah just went through my mind on this whole subject of how we relate to a person who doesn't sin or do things wrong. Is there in our tradition the part where we think about the time of the Messiah, the Messianic era? Is it include everybody behaving better than we are until we get to the point where we all are behaving like the Messiah?
You have opened up a hornet's nest. So I would say, you know, on a simplistic level, the Messiah is a king of Israel. Mashiach, he's anointed. And boy, if you look at the history of kings of Israel, you would not say they are without sin.
No.
King David as, you know, exhibit
But
A. But there is this sense that someday redemption will come, and there's all kinds of speculation that if every Jew in the world observes 2 Sabbaths consecutively, that the Messiah will come. So there is this sense, which is a mystical idea, which is a really interesting mystical idea, is that the world cannot be redeemed by God. The world needs humans to redeem it.
yeah, so we have a role. Then I went when asked that with the hornet's nest you referred to. So if we reach that point, which we're aspiring to, we get the Messiah, but what do we get? You know, that's the question.
I don't understand the question.
Yeah.
But the book of Job has nothing to do with the Messiah. And the Messiah, as someone who shows up in the end of days and makes everything terrific, is not a concept that is really explored in the Bible.
Okay.
Explored in the Talmud, it's explored in mysticism, but not in the Bible. It's certainly explored in the New Testament, but not in the Hebrew Bible.
Okay, thanks.
I think we're here.
When I lie down, I think, when shall I rise? Night drags on, and I am sated with tossings till morning twilight. My flesh is covered with maggots and clouds of earth. My skin is broken and festering. My days fly faster than a weaver's shuttle and come to their end without hope.
Just noting the word hope is tikva, I think, as we know.
As a cloud fades away, so whoever goes down to the Sheol does not come up. He returns no more to his home. His place does not know him. On my part, I will not speak with restraint. I will give voice to the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul.
So, major point here, neither Job nor his friends speak of an afterlife. So one answer to the question of when bad things happen to good people is maybe you'll get your reward in the afterlife. That is a reasonable and oft mentioned idea, that the sufferings that we have in this life buy us a better life in the world to come. But that is not an out that the book of Job is going to address. And by and large, the Bible doesn't really speak of an afterlife in any of the senses that we think of the afterlife. Sheol is often the word used for a place that you go to when you die. And it's generally down, Yorad LaSheol. And, scholars say Sheol is related to the Hebrew word Sheolah, which means question. So it's a questionable place. We don't really know what's going on. And again, I can't remember if I have a comment. Yeah, I do have a comment. Job is not shy about being angry with God. So he is not going to restrain himself on basically attacking what's happening to him in the face of God. Okay.
Rabbi, you raised a point there, and I just want to make sure we're not treating it simplistically. This idea that whatever afflictions that you get in this life, whatever sufferings you have here, makes the afterlife a better place for you.
That is what's Judaism doesn't dwell on those issues, but that is one answer to the question.
I have a used timeshare that someone could buy if they'll buy that one.
Yes. Okay. But the issue is what do you find that's comforting? If that idea is comforting, That's not a bad thing. You know, religion is often criticized as a crutch, but I can say
Right.
if you've got a bad leg, a crutch is a wonderful thing to have. So, yeah, it may be simplistic, and if people find it comforting, I would say it's fine. Okay, now another friend, Bildad.
Bildad. Oh, sorry.
So actually, let's have someone else who hasn't yet read Bildad. Going once, going twice. Cheryl, go ahead.
Bildad the Shuhite said in reply, "How long will you speak such things? Your utterances are a mighty wind. Will God pervert the right? Will the Almighty pervert justice?"
So, right, mishpat, justice, tzedek.
If your sons sinned against him, he dispatched them for their transgression. But if you seek God and supplicate the Almighty, if you are blameless and upright, he will protect you and grant well-being to your righteous home.
Okay, again, very simplistic Deuteronomy.
Surely God does not despise the blameless. He gives no support to evildoers. He will yet fill your mouth with laughter and your lips with shouts of joy. Your enemies will be clothed in disgrace. The tent of the wicked will vanish.
Who was reading Job? I think it was.
That was me.
That was you, your Job.
Okay, go ahead.
Job said in reply, "Indeed, I know that it is so. Man cannot win a suit against God. If he insisted on a trial with him, he would not answer one charge in 1,000. Wise of heart and mighty in power, whoever challenged him and came out whole?"
Job was arguing that it's futile to argue with God who has such power. So definitely not Kushner, who argues that God's power is unlimited. Job is recognizing that God is indeed all powerful. Jerry, hold on a
Yeah,
second.
just
Jerry.
a quick comment. If you think all of Job's friends, and I go friends again like this,
It's
are in alignment of one kind of viewpoint, right? Well, then I never thought about this before, but that means maybe Job would have been of that viewpoint prior to this happening to him as well.
Oh, that's a very interesting point. Yeah, because you would think that's a very interesting point. Never thought
Yeah,
of
if he's without sin, why would he be egalitarian about it? Hey, I'm without sin, and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, what I interpreted you saying is you hang out with people you tend to agree with.
That's
So
it, yeah.
so these are his friends, and so it is interesting that they're faced with the decision: blame the victim or blame God, and they're going to clearly come and blame the victim.
Yeah, I mean, Job would have been in with them if it was somebody else.
It might well be.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Job.
Him who moves mountains without their knowing it, who overturns them in his anger, who shakes the earth from its place till its pillars quake, who commands the sun not to shine, who seals up the stars, who by himself spread out the heavens and trod on the back of the sea.
Oh.
So again, Job is acknowledging God's omnipotence in nature.
yeah, but God has an anger problem here too.
An anger problem here? Yeah, well, yes,
Well,
verse 5.
But
Yep.
in his anger, referring to God's anger.
God's kind of touchy, God's kind of touchy about certain.
Susan, I can't quite understand what you're saying if you're speaking to us.
Oh, I was just saying it. God seems to be angry an awful lot. From the
God can be
beginning
angry
to
and
now.
also what?
An awful lot. I mean,
That's a
Good point.
different part of the Bible.
Yeah.
But
So Job is acknowledging that God gets angry and mountains tremble. And so Job is basically very eloquently saying God is very powerful. Let's continue, Bryce.
Though I were in the right, I could not speak out. But I would plead for mercy with my judge. If I summoned him and he responded, I do not believe he would lend me his ear, for he crushes me with Targum and Pershita or with a storm for a hair. He wounds me much for no cause.
Okay.
Though
I'm going to have a lot of boxes that say Job denies God's justice in the next couple of verses.
Yeah.
if a
6:10.
trial of strength, he is the strong one. If a trial in court, who will summon him for me? Though I were innocent, my mouth would condemn me. Though I were blameless, he would prove me crooked. I am blameless. I am distraught. I am sick of life. It is all one. Therefore, I say, he destroys the blameless and the guilty.
I think, yeah, again, denying justice. I can't remember if I have no.
We'll just take that one as said.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, one of the interesting things here is we're getting this sense that Job would like to call God in a trial. And ultimately, that's what's going to happen. Job summons God to be defendant, judge, and jury in the trial of Job versus God. Job demands that God shows up, and God does show up. And, you'll have to wait till the exciting conclusion to see what the verdict is.
The earth is handed over to the wicked one. He covers the eyes of its judges. If it is not he, then who? He is not a man like me that I can answer him, that we can go to law together. No arbiter is between us to lay his hand on us both.
Said it before, I'll say it again. Kushner reads 33. Again, these are different translations. Would that there were an umpire between us to lay his hand on both. So this word is low, no arbiter, and he's reading it because, again, unvocalized as lu, which would be would there be that there were an arbiter. So again, you can you can change the words to make it either more understandable or the translator's dilemma.
The earth is handed over to the wicked one. He covers the eyes of its judges. If it is not he, then who?
Again, denying justice. Kushner in this book, the commentary on the book of Job, says, and I quote, "There is perhaps no more frightening line in all of Scripture than the words of verse 24. Whenever I read Job, I am astonished that this book and Ecclesiastes as well were admitted to the canon." And the canon means books of the Bible. Remember, the Bible is not one book. The Bible is a collection, Hebrew Bible, 39 separate books. So here is a book that seems to, at least in the mouth of Job, vehemently disagree with everything, with much of what we've seen, that God is actually covering the eyes of the judges. The sages of the Talmud argue forcibly that the wicked one cannot possibly refer to God. It makes you wonder what they really thought. If it's the rabbis protest too much, because it's clearly he's clearly talking about God, but this upsets the rabbis of the Talmud so much that they argue that he couldn't possibly. Let's see. I think it's 8. Yeah, it's just about 8 o'clock. So
It is.
I am going to pause our screen share and discussion. I am traveling next week, so there will not be a Job class next week. I'm going to send that reminder tonight when I send you the video here. And so we do have a class this week on Wednesdays for those of you who like to come on both nights, and that one is on angels. And but we will not have a class either Monday or Wednesday of next week.
Rabbi?
Rabbi,
Yes,
Oh.
go ahead.
I was listening so intently to this whole discussion about being angry at God if you have sickness or anything. And that's interesting for me because without going into detail, I have a very difficult and complex medical condition.
Mhm.
It stinks, okay? But I'm not angry at God. I mean, I'm very disappointed and sad about it, but I ask God for comfort. You know, going or and with lots and lots of medical testing done on a regular basis, I always ask Hashem for
Okay.
comfort.
Well,
I don't,
I appreciate that. I can tell you in my own life, I am very angry with God.
all right, I understand.
And I like the idea that Judaism allows that.
Right.
And you know, I'm reminded something I quote a lot. Helen Telushkin, Rabbi Joseph Telushkin's mother, is quoted as saying, "The only people I know without serious problems are people I don't know very well." So everyone faces these issues. And so, you know, I love the idea that we have a book of the Bible that addresses it clearly and you know, on its face. And
Yeah, well,
and it's worth studying. Yes, Erwin.
I just would like to tell you that when some really tragic things happens in your life, you become angry. You could become angry and say why, or you look into yourself and a very incredible peace, internal peace come up on yourself, and it helps a great deal. It doesn't I don't say that when you are at night, at late dark night, you don't cry and don't feel very bad, but internally you become peaceful within yourself.
I would say you may be describing your reaction, and Joanne's nodding is describing her reaction. It's not my reaction. So
Okay.
It's hard because what works for one may not work for somebody else. I
well,
know.
and it's and I don't even know if it's a question of what works. But I would also point out you can't be angry at something you don't believe in. So, you know, I run into people who've had tragedy in their life and they are angry that they're never going into a synagogue again. I don't believe in God. You know, I'm angry at God and I've had it with God and I'm not going to believe in God and I'm not going to go to synagogue. And, you know, sometimes if I ignore the advice that I've given before and talk about theology, I will just point out that you can't be angry at a God that you don't believe in. If there's no God, then there's nothing to be angry about. You may be disappointed with your bad luck, but but there's nothing to be angry about. It's just, you know, crap happens, to coin a phrase. Yes, Bryce.
Well, you know, that statement is really true if someone grew up without ever believing in God. Okay, that's like I know someone very, very close to me that grew up in a socialist family and had no belief in God of any kind whatsoever, doesn't believe in God, and finds the fact that I struggle with God to be amusing. Okay, but you see, I grew up in a Seventh-day Adventist family where I believed so strongly in God that I spoke to Jesus multiple times a day and had conversations and things like that. And that builds structures in your mind from childhood. You've got a God entity in your head for the rest of your life. And you can be angry at that God entity, and it doesn't go away simply because you don't believe it doesn't exist in the larger world, in the world of reality. It still exists in your own construct.
Yeah, okay. I don't disagree with that. Alan.
The way you worded this, you can't believe in something you can be mad at.
No,
but
you don't believe in something
you can't be mad at something you don't believe in.
Right.
Believe in.
Yes.
But it reminds me of how it might be a test of whether you do believe in God when you suggest that, because the person is already angry, and you're helping them not be angry on the premise of what they say. They don't believe in God, but they probably do believe in God. Or there's a part of believing in God that is at play here, and maybe you're helping. If you say that to them, it's helping them bring that to the surface, and maybe you can work with that after.
So what I would say is, things happen to you in your life, and it is reasonable and natural to be angry about things that happen in your life. If you then say, therefore, I'm angry at God, and I therefore will not believe in God, my pastoral approach would be, God can handle your anger. In any deep relationship, there is love and there is often anger, but you know, it's, again, there's a time to talk theology, and there's just a time to comfort. Jerry.
I have never said, why me for anything, but I have said, why anybody? The fact that something exists, I know that I have not been the only one dealing with something.
Mhm.
And like you said, everybody suffers, and Mrs. Telushkin understood that.
Right.
But the idea is, we understand maybe a little bit of the purpose of suffering, in that maybe we can be grateful for the times when we're not. But for a child to suffer, for a young person at any age, and for the horrific diseases that exist, you know, that's what I say, why anybody should
Yeah. So if that is an actual question rather than just an expression of dismay, that's the question that Kushner is dealing with, and the book of Job is dealing with, and that is, why anyone? And one answer is that God is not just. That's Job's answer. Kushner and my answer is that God is not all powerful and doesn't have the ability to eliminate that suffering. So again, if you take that question as a serious question rather than just a lament, then it's important to address that question. And in theology, that's called theodicy. It is I think to me, it's the most important question in religion.
Better than the idiocy.
Better than what?
The idiocy.
Oh,
theodicy is better than the idiocy. Yes.
Right.
But one of the things that I wanted to say is one of the things that I do to deal with this thing, the idea of being angry, is that, and if you're angry at God, it's because you expect that God is somehow responsible for you being where you are. And that is the idea that that God is actually guiding the hand of the world and is making minute changes, and happens because this is God's plan and whatnot, which completely takes away the idea that we have any control or direction of our own lives. And that's the way that I deal with it, is by saying that whatever God is or isn't, he's not doing anything here in the world. It's up to us, you know.
When I'm angry with God, I'm not necessarily being logical or rational. Alan.
You just want to, I got a little confused at the end, Bruce, Bryce, what you said, but I believe in that God has given us free will, which is I think that what you started to say, God is controlling every hand that you move.
No, I'm not. I'm saying that that if you're going to be angry at God, then for things that have happened in life, then implicit in that is the idea that God is controlling what is occurring in the world, and that that car that crashed into you was being guided by God. That is the anger. That is the anger of God, and I'm denying it. I'm saying that I don't think God has any activity in the world at large at all, and it is up to us, and that's why I'm not mad at God.
But that depends, it's sort of, I think Rabbi Mike had said it earlier, when you look at it the Kushner way or his way, you leave room for the fact that God doesn't do everything. And free will comes in, that kind of thing. Anyway,
Well,
Yeah,
I-
so
you know, where do you draw the line?
I view evil as free will, but there's still tragedy. There's still cancer. There is Huntington's disease. There's earthquakes. There's so that is hard to
Sunspots.
that's hard to attribute to free will. I would say God has a role in the world, but it's not to be a puppeteer. God's role is as a teacher, an inspirer, a comforter, and those are significant things, but they're not magician or controller. Jim.
Earlier, we were talking about whether Christians can be mad at God, and you know how close we hold Mother Mary. Well, there's only one story of Jesus before he was an adult. He was 12 years old. Real briefly, he wasn't where he was supposed to be. And so his parents spent 3 days looking for him. When they finally found him, I contend that Mary was mad at God because she looked at Jesus and said, "Why did you do this to your father and I?" And that, when I tell that to people, generally see their eyes open like, wow, Mary got mad at God, so I guess it's okay for me to on occasion.
So you interpreted the father there as God, not Joseph.
No, she was talking about Joseph. Why did you do this to your father and I?
Oh, so why do you think she's mad at God? Or you're saying she's mad at Jesus and same thing, mad at God? I don't understand.
Well,
the
Jesus
simple
is the Son
meaning
of God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
No, I got
So
it.
there's God in front of her, and she was mad at him.
Oh, okay.
So
got it.
it's okay in Catholic theology, as far as I can tell.
Okay. And I would say, when we speak for Christianity, I always remember there are 43,000 different branches of Christianity, and not all of them are so focused on Mary. So that's just important
No, I can
for
only
honesty.
I can only speak for one of those 43.
Right. Okay, so thank you all for coming and for the discussion. I hope you find it as useful as I do, because I certainly am still learning.
can you just remind us the 2 times we're not going to have class? I think
Next week, a week from today and a week from Wednesday. And
Okay.
both in the same
both
week,
days.
Monday and
Yes,
Wednesday. Okay,
yes,
thank
yes.
you very much. That's
I'm
all.
going to be in Montana visiting family.
Thank you and have a good night.
Oh,
Okay, take care.
Thank you, everybody.
bye. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Kind of interesting watching people disappear.